You know, I've often argued that people are policy. That if you're bringing somebody into your administration, if you're bringing somebody into your job space or whatever else, you're bringing that person in for a reason. It's not for shits and giggles. It's not because you just like their mustache. In this case, talking about John Bolton. When Donald Trump, who was supposed to be the peacenik between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, meaning in that race, one person wanted to have a missile defense shield in Syria, which was going to start a war, and the other person was supposed to be more of a peacenik. At the very least, yes, hawkish on Iran, but at the very least, there was one thought of maybe he's not going to be a lunatic. Maybe he'll be more compromising in regards to being less hawkish. And then he brings on Pompeo, and then he brings on John Bolton. In which case, all thoughts of that went out the way. Because if you're bringing on John Bolton, you're not bringing on John Bolton because you like his mustache. You're bringing on John Bolton because John Bolton is a maniac. Here we are. John Bolton being John Bolton. Take a look at this. John Bolton is pushing Donald Trump to withdraw from the Russian nuclear arms treaty. Now, his argument is that the new missiles that Russia has, the hypersonic missiles, whatever that Vladimir Putin was showing off, violates the treaty, and so he wants to pull out of this treaty. The reality of this is that the United States has expanded NATO, despite assurances that they weren't going to expand NATO. My point here is that the reasoning, if you look at the map, we've expanded NATO around the Russian border. Now, the United States was willing to go to nuclear war to prevent missiles from being put into Cuba, but we have expanded around the Russian border. Not just expanded around the Russian border, we have directly intervened into Russian politics in the Bill Clinton administration, going so far as to literally run a campaign for Boris Yeltsin, a drunk. This is magnificently dangerous. This is magnificently dangerous. And this is up in the ante. You've had a hysteria in this country where they've screamed and howled at the top of their lungs, a bunch of howler monkeys, that Donald Trump was somehow elected by Russia. And by Twitter and Facebook ads, somehow was the determining factor in Hillary Clinton losing that election. Hillary Clinton lost the election because Hillary Clinton lost the election. It had nothing to do with the Russian government. And yet, that's what they've used as this kind of excuse for her magnificent failure to reality show hosts. Now, you're breaking. You can't have it both ways. And there has to be fairness. And what I mean by, and you may say fairness doesn't necessarily exist in a political space. The fact is, it is a nonsense position to say we can put missile systems around your country and we can try to lock you in. I mean, part of the reasoning and the goal was for them to lock in China and Russia. However, if you try to develop countermeasures to the things that we're doing, we're going to throw a hissy fit and we're going to pull out of our agreements. Donald Trump is already talking about a space force which would break other treaties that we've signed. It seems that treaties don't really matter to us. We seem to be above the law, international law, and for the most part, willing to kick off any treaty that we don't particularly like when we feel like it. John Bolton is a maniac. And when whatever these people like H.A. Goodman want to say about Donald Trump and all this other stuff, he's a maniac. John Bolton is a maniac. And Donald Trump, a reality show host, listening to this maniac is terrifying. Let's take a look at the story. I just came across this. National Security Advisor recommends ending intermediate range missile nuclear forces treaty over alleged Russian violations. It wasn't Russia violated. And by the way, just to make a point, newly declassified documents, Gorbachev told NATO wouldn't move past East German border. We won't move 1 inch eastward. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev was given a host of assurances that NATO alliance would not expand what was the East German border in 1990, according to the new declassified documents. We're expanded around their country. Russia has been invaded twice by the West. In one case, 10 million people were killed. In another, I think 5 million or 2 million. In another case, 10 million people. They lost a magnificent number of people in those incursions into their country. You can imagine they would be somewhat sensitive about their borders. And in the same way that we will feel some kind of way if countries were militarily expanding around our borders, I would imagine they feel some kind of way about countries expanding around theirs, especially with hostile intent. They will be insane not to come up with countermeasures for what they would perceive as our aggression and belligerence. Just saying. Right here. John Bolton is pushing for the United States to withdraw from a Cold War era control treaty with Russia in the face of resistance from others in the Trump administration and the United States allies, according to sources briefed on the initiative. Bolton, Donald Trump's third national security advisor, has issued a recommendation for withdrawal from the 1987 International Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which the United States says Russia has been violating with the development of a new cruise missile. Again, the development of a new cruise missile was because we've been surrounding their country with weapons. Understand, the cruise missile wasn't created for shits and giggles. Nobody wants to invest huge amounts of resources into weapons and munitions if they don't have to. Well, the United States. But that's more because it's a jobs program. The Russian government spends, $80 billion on the military. The amount of money we increased our military budget is more than what they spend on their entire military budget per year. The missiles were countermeasures. That needs to be understood. The actions that your country takes has consequences. Some of those consequences are threats to other nations. Withdrawal from the treaty, which would mark a sharp break in U.S. arms control policy, has yet to be agreed upon by the cabinet that faces opposition from within the State Department and the Pentagon. A meeting on Monday, thankfully there are people who are sane in some of those areas, despite the hubris of some. A meeting on Monday at the White House to discuss the withdrawal proposal was postponed. Bolton, who has spent his career opposing arms control and has been wrong in everything that he's ever done, is seeking to shrug off the traditional role of the National Security Advisor as a policy broker between the agencies and is becoming the driver of radical change from within the White House. Former U.S. officials say Bolton is blocking talks on extending the 2010 New START treaty with the Russians, limiting deployed strategic nuclear warheads and their delivery systems. The treaty is due to expire in 2021, and Moscow has signaled its interest in extension, but Bolton is opposing the resumption of strategic stability dialogue to discuss the future of arms control between the two countries. The United States has briefed its European allies this week about the proposal, sounding out reactions. The briefing alarmed UK officials who seek the INF as an important arms control pillar. Yes, it should alarm them. The United States alleges that Russia is now violating the treaty with the deployment of ground-launched cruise missiles known as the 9M729. They need to give that a better name. Moscow insists that the missile does not violate the range restriction of the INF and alleges in return that a U.S. missile defense system deployed in Eastern Europe against a potential Iranian threat could be adapted to fire medium-range offensive missiles at Russia. That is true, by the way. Oftentimes, countries use excuses of one thing for something else. Oh, we're just putting that to counter Iran. It's not just to counter Iran. In fact is, if the missile system can be used for something else, Russia's not insane for saying, well, wait a minute, you're also violating this because you're putting a missile system right near our border. I don't care what you said the name of it is for or what it's for. It can be used either to attack us or as some kind of capability. Let's keep going. The United States has started to brief allies with the possibility of withdrawal, but I don't believe that there is any kind of interagency process in the administration, said John Wolfstall, a former senior director for non-proliferation and arms control at the NSC. The Trump administration's nuclear posture review, released in February, called for the United States to do research on its own ground-launched medium-range missiles as a way of pressuring Moscow to push Moscow back into INF compliance. It did not advocate leaving the treaty. Nobody advocates leaving the treaty. John Bolton advocates leaving the treaty. John Bolton is a maniac. The review was completed before John Bolton came to the White House and is now seeking to toughen the administration's nuclear stance. Over the summer, he brought into the White House another hardliner on arms control, Tim Morrison, former Republican policy director on the House Armed Services Committee, and between them, they've taken the lead on arms control issues away from the State Department. These people are going to lead you into a war. These people are going to lead you into a war. Bolton's meeting with his Russian counterpart, Nikolai Patrushev, in Geneva in August was expected to give the final green light to the dialogue, but Bolton is said to have blocked it. He is due to visit Moscow next week when the Kremlin said he may meet Vladimir Putin. That should be interesting. That should be interesting. In remarks in Sochi on Thursday, Putin suggests that Russia would adopt a no first use policy on nuclear weapons. We have no concept of a preemptive strike, he told the conference. We expect to be struck by nuclear weapons, but we will not use them first, he said. Jesus Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Is this where we are? Look. Right here. Alexander Bell, a former senior arms control official at the State Department, now at the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation, said that in informal track 2 discussions, Russian arms control experts suggest Moscow might be ready to compromise to salvage the INF. You should be able to get somewhere with the Russians, but Bolton doesn't seem interested, Bell said. Think about that. Think about that. That's hubris. This idea that he should be able to dictate the terms of any level of agreement. That fairness isn't necessary. Agreement isn't even necessary. I just need you to come to my position. Period. The entire reason that Russia created those missiles was for defensive capabilities because of what we were doing from the standpoint of expanding NATO around their borders. I know Miguel. I watched the interview with Mikhail Gorbachev, and you talking about somebody who was kicking himself. Man, he's kicking himself. John Bolton, maniac. When John Bolton first got on the Trump administration, the first thing that I said was, John Bolton is a maniac, people of policy, and you're not bringing people on unless you're going to espouse the policies that the people are coming on for. Well, here we are. He's pulling out of nuclear arms agreement with Russia. That's great. That's great. Bolton is a joke. Neither Trump or Bolton are going to be able to make decisions on it like this. Dude, I'm sorry, you are massively mistaken. You're massively mistaken. Back during the Kennedy administration, they thought that they were going to end up with a nuclear exchange with Russia during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was backdoor interactions between two countries that was able to resolve that issue, not necessarily over the board talks. Khrushchev sends this panic message, followed by the hardliners who are sending a message. Countries can stumble into wars. I'm sorry if you don't believe that. There's no man behind the curtain. These are the lunatics running the asylum. Yes, there's a reality show host as president. And yes, that reality show host does make decisions as president, whatever you want to think of the powers of that office. Bolton has zero respect from his peers. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need it. You have a much larger faith that there's some man behind the curtain. That man behind the curtain doesn't exist. The people who are running the country are lunatics. They're psychopaths. Bolton is whispering in the ear of a reality show host. A reality show host that hired Bolton to whisper in his ear. In the same way that this lunatic is talking about a space force, it is possible that they pull out of this treaty. They pulled out of other treaties. I don't see why this one would be any different. I take them at their word. When they tell me they're lunatics, I take them at their word. So, all right, out in this, sorry, there are institutions behind the curtain and these people don't have the power you think they do. I feel you, Garden. I hope you're right. I hope you're right. We're ruled by bloodthirsty psychopaths. Yeah, I think they're psychopaths. I mean, if you can kill that many people, I mean, the number of bombs that we drop is astonishing. All right. I'm going to end this. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon, which is a get out. Get out. You can try. Let's say you can check out. I don't know the same. What is it? The motel you can check in, but you can never leave, or something to that effect. You can check out, but you can never leave. All right. You all have a good one. I'll see you tomorrow.